Hello, dear adventurers. Welcome back to Midnight Tales, your cozy corner of the night where the world outside goes quiet and the world inside your imagination opens wide and welcoming. I'm so glad you're here. Whether you've just settled into your favorite chair, pulled the blankets up around your shoulders, or you're lying somewhere soft and still with the lights turned low, I want you to know that this space was made for exactly this moment right here, where the day finally lets go of you and you let go of it in return. Tonight we are going somewhere very special, somewhere that does not appear on any map that has ever been drawn, in any atlas that has ever been printed, in any corner of any library that exists in the ordinary waking world. The place we are going only appears to certain people, at a certain hour, under a certain kind of sky. And something tells me, something quiet and sure, the way all the best instincts feel, that you are exactly the right kind of person, that you have always been exactly the right kind of person for this journey. So, breathe in slowly. Let the air fill your chest, warm and easy. Then breathe out and feel the day begin to dissolve at the edges like mist burning off the surface of a still lake in the early morning. Let your shoulders drop. Let the muscles in your jaw unclench. Let your hands rest open and heavy, one on each side of you, palms turned gently upward, as if you are ready to receive something good. Because you are about to receive a story. And this is not just any story. This is the story of the Midnight Library and the ancient dragon who guards it. Part 1. The Path Through the Forest. It begins, as the best stories always do, on an evening that feels different from all the other evenings that came before it. You have been walking for a while now. The path beneath your feet is old, older than the worn leather of the boots that carry you, older than the lantern light that pools soft and amber at your feet, older perhaps than the names of the trees that line either side of you like tall, patient sentinels standing watch over a road that has always known where it leads, even when the traveler does not. The forest on either side of the path is the kind of forest that inspires quiet. It is not a frightening quiet. It is not the held breath stillness of something dangerous hiding close by. It is something altogether more gentle than that, the hush of a place that has been undisturbed for a very long time, and is content with that, and is willing to share that contentment with anyone who walks through it slowly enough to notice. The trees here are old. Their bark is dark and deeply furrowed, carved by decades of rain and frost and long summers. Moss grows in thick green patches along their roots, cushioning the ground like nature's own velvet. The canopy above you is dense enough in places that you can only see the night sky in small, irregular patches, fragments of deep blue-black heaven framed by the silhouettes of branches. And in those patches, stars, dozens and dozens of stars, each one a steady, unblinking light, not cold, not distant, just there, the way a candle in a window is there, offering its small, reliable warmth to whoever happens to look up. The air smells of earth and pine, and something that is not quite either of those things, something older and sweeter underneath, like the ghost of wood smoke from a fire that burned here 100 years ago, and whose warmth somehow still lingers in the soil. You breathe it in and something in your chest loosens. Your lantern swings gently as you walk. The light it casts moves with a soft, rocking rhythm, painting shadows that shift and settle among the roots and bracken on either side of the path. Somewhere far off in the trees, an owl calls, one long, low note, unhurried, and then silence again. The silence that follows is even deeper than the silence before, the kind of silence that feels like a gift. You have been walking without any particular destination in mind, or perhaps you have been walking towards something you can't quite name yet. That feeling, the one that tugs at the edges of an ordinary evening and makes it feel charged with something quiet and expectant, has been with you all day. You couldn't put it into words if you tried. It is something like the feeling you get before a good book pulls you in past the point of no return. That gentle tipping sensation, that willingness to fall, and then you see it. At first you think it is moonlight. The moon is bright tonight, nearly full, hanging low and luminous over the tree line to the east. Its light filters down through the branches in long silver columns, pooling in the clearings, turning fallen leaves into small coins of pale light. So when you first notice the glow ahead, somewhere deeper in the forest, off to the left of the path, you think it is simply the moon being generous with its light in some natural clearing you haven't reached yet. But then you stop walking. Because this light is not silver. It is not the cold, clean light of the moon. It is blue, a deep, luminous, impossible blue, like the color at the very heart of a flame, or like the light that lives inside a glacier if you go far enough in. It does not flicker the way fire does. It glows, steady and full, and slightly warm looking, even from this distance. It seems to breathe, very slowly, the way sleeping things breathe. In and out, in and out. The glow softens, deepens, softens again. You stand very still on the path for a moment. The lantern in your hand makes a small, creaking sound as it sways. And then, very slowly, something in you decides. Not your mind, exactly. Somewhere lower and older and more certain than the mind. Something that recognizes the glow the way you recognize a melody you haven't heard since childhood. A recognition that bypasses logic entirely and goes straight to the place where the important things are stored. You step off the path. The forest floor is soft beneath your feet. The mossy ground gives slightly with each step, cushioning your weight, and the sound of your own footsteps becomes hushed and muffled, as if the forest itself is encouraging you to move quietly here, to treat this particular direction with a kind of reverent care. The trees part easily enough. No undergrowth snatches at your sleeves. No roots trip you up. The way through feels cleared or at least cooperative, as if the forest has made peace with people coming through here, as if this is a route that has been used before by travelers just like you, pulled by exactly this same strange blue light toward exactly this same destination. As you walk toward the glow, you begin to notice other things. The air changes slightly. It becomes warmer, not the warmth of a fire, but more like the warmth of a room that has been inhabited for a very long time, a warmth that comes from being enclosed and loved in and full of memory. There is a faint smell, too, drifting through the trees now. It takes you a moment to place it. Old paper, dust, something like beeswax from old candles, something like the specific dry, sweet, faintly vanilla smell of a very old book left open on a sunny afternoon. The smell of stories, the smell of pages. You push through a final curtain of low-hanging branches. The leaves brush your face and hands like soft fingers. And then you stop. And you see it. The building that should not exist here. It sits in a clearing in the forest, and the clearing itself is strange and perfect, too perfectly shaped and sized for the building it contains to be anything other than intentional. The trees ring it in a near-perfect circle, their branches arching overhead and where the branches meet above. The roofline, they seem to lean inward as if bowing, as if the forest itself is paying its respects to something old. The building is made of stone, dark gray stone, deeply weathered, the kind of stone that has absorbed centuries of rain and cold and heat and emerged from all of it with a kind of serene gravity. It is not a small building. It rises 2 stories, possibly 3, with a facade that is detailed and intricate in a way that is hard to make out at first glance. There are columns along the front, carved from the same dark stone, each one wound with ivy so thick and green and alive-looking that the ivy seems almost deliberate, almost decorative, as if it was planted there and has simply been growing according to its own slow and stately plan for as long as anyone can remember. The ivy covers much of the front face of the building, too, creeping up the walls and around the tall windows, framing them in green with here and there the pale ivory of a stone carving peeking through. A face, a hand, the sinuous curve of something winged, the suggestion of letters in a script you don't recognize. The windows are tall and arched, and from every one of them comes that light. The blue glow, warm and impossible and entirely its own, pouring out through the glass and lying in long, soft pools on the grass of the clearing outside. The grass itself, you notice now, looks as though it grows in a slightly different way here, greener and more even than any grass you've seen in the forest, as if the light from those windows has been falling on it for a very long time, and it has grown accustomed to basking in something more than sunlight. Above the front door, the door itself is enormous. 2 heavy panels of dark wood banded in iron, set into a stone arch carved with symbols you can almost read. Almost. The meaning hovering just at the edge of comprehension. Above the door, carved in deep relief into the stone, is a single image, a dragon. Its wings are spread wide, filling the entire arch, each feather-scaled wingtip curling at the edges with something that might be flame and might be starlight. Its head is turned in profile, and its eye, the eye that faces outward, is an open circle, smooth and polished, a single dark gem set into the stone. In the blue light of the building, the gem glows. It catches the light and holds it and throws it back, and for one breath-stopping moment, it seems to look directly at you. Then the door opens. Not all at once, not with a bang or a crash. The door opens slowly, one panel swinging inward with a long, deep creak of ancient iron hinges, the sound resonating in the still air of the clearing. No one is there to open it. Nothing visible anyway. It simply opens with the patient, unhurried gravity of a door that has been waiting for this exact moment for a long time and sees no need to rush it now that it has arrived. Warm light spills out through the opening. Not just the blue light, though that is still there, underlying everything, giving the air just inside the door a faint and magical luminescence, but also the warmer gold of candlelight. Dozens and dozens of candles you see now lit inside. The combination of the two lights is extraordinary. Together they create something that looks less like any ordinary interior lighting and more like a color that has no name yet. A color that belongs to the hour between deepest night and the first soft gray of coming morning. A color that only exists here and only at this hour. You take one step toward the door, then another, and another, and you step inside the Midnight Library. Part 2. Inside. The first thing you notice is the shelves. They are everywhere, floor to ceiling, which means something rather significant here, because the ceilings are very, very high, much higher than seems architecturally possible from looking at the outside of the building, which is part of the library's quiet magic. The way the interior is simply larger than the exterior, as if space itself has made a small, comfortable compromise for the sake of all the books. The shelves are made of dark wood, the same deep, almost black brown of old walnut or ancient oak, and they are so densely packed with books that the shelves themselves are nearly invisible behind them. Books of every size and thickness and color. Books so large they must be consulted from a standing position. Books so small you'd need to hold them close to the candlelight to read the fine printed words inside. Books bound in leather of black and brown and deep wine red and midnight blue and a green so dark it is almost the color of a forest at night. Books bound in what looks like woven cloth, embroidered with patterns of animals and stars. Books that have no bindings at all. Loose sheaves of papers held together with cord or ribbon, or a pressed flower used as a bookmark and never removed. Books that appear to be carved from something that is not paper and not stone, but something more like polished wood, their pages thin and smooth and pale gold. And the books glow, not all of them, but many. Here and there along the shelves, a book will emit that faint and beautiful blue light, some more brightly than others, some so faint that you might miss it if you weren't looking. Each book seems to glow at its own particular wavelength, its own particular frequency of blue, so that looking down a long shelf is like looking at a slow, silent firework frozen in place, a spectrum of quiet luminescence from the palest near white through the deep saturated blue of deep ocean water. The air inside the library is warm and very still, not stuffy. There is a faint movement to it, the gentlest circulation, as if the building breathes very slowly, and the air carries that smell, stronger here, wonderful and clean and irreplaceable. Old books, the particular perfume of collected written words. There is wood polish somewhere in it, and candle wax, and something like dried lavender, and underneath it all a faint mineral coolness from the stone walls and floors that keeps the warmth from tipping over into heaviness. The floor is stone, dark, worn smooth by what must be an unimaginable number of footsteps over an unimaginable number of years, though it does not look worn in a damaged or sad way. It looks worn the way a beloved path looks worn, a path that has been used by so many feet for so many purposes and is the better for it. It catches the candlelight in small, irregular gleams where the surface has been polished by that long traffic to near brightness. The candles themselves are everywhere. They sit in iron holders attached to the ends of the shelves. They stand in clusters on low wooden tables placed at intervals throughout the room, tables which also hold other things, an open book with pages held flat by small, smooth stones, a magnifying glass with a brass handle, a cup of something that has long since gone cold, a folded scarf, the accumulated domestic evidence of a space that is loved and used and lived in. The candles burn without guttering. Their flames stand perfectly upright, each one a still, warm point of gold, undisturbed by any draft. There are hundreds of them. The light they produce collectively is generous and even, filling the library with a warm amber radiance that catches in the spines of the books, turns the dust motes in the air into little points of floating gold, and makes everything look, somehow, exactly the way a library looks in your memory, of the best library you have ever been in. Even better than memory, in fact, the way a place sometimes exceeds the memory of it. You walk forward slowly, running your fingertips along the spines of the books as you pass. Some of the spines are smooth under your fingers, and some are rough. Some have letters raised in relief, and some are blank. Some are warm to the touch, and some are cool. Where you touch a glowing book, the glow intensifies slightly for a moment. Just a brightening, just the warmth of a hello, and then settles back to its usual steady luminescence. The shelves are organized in a way that makes a kind of intuitive sense, though not the sense of the Dewey Decimal System or any other conventional library cataloging system. The books near the front of the library are larger and seem older, and as you move deeper into the warm, branching aisles between the shelves, the books seem to change character. Here in one section, every book is bound in midnight blue, and their titles, when they have visible titles at all, appear to be in languages you do not recognize. Further on, an entire section where every book seems to be vibrating at a very low frequency. A vibration you can't quite hear but can feel. A hum that moves through your fingertips when you touch the spines. And in a corner, lit by a cluster of candles that burn with an unusual stillness, a section where the books are so small that an entire shelf of them would fit in the palm of your hand. You pick up one of these tiny books. It falls open, of its own accord, in your palm. The pages are covered in handwriting, so fine it looks like it was written with a single hair. You can't read the words, but you look at them for a long, quiet moment. And for some reason, the act of looking makes you feel a distant, inexplicable sadness that is not unpleasant. The kind of sadness that is just feeling, just the sensation of being human in a world full of things that are beautiful and brief. You set the little book gently back in its place. Then you hear something. Deep in the library, deeper than you have yet gone. A sound like breathing, very slow, very deep, each exhale a sound at the edge of hearing, a low resonance that you feel in your ribs and your sternum more than you hear with your ears. The kind of breathing that belongs to something very large, very old, very deeply at rest. You follow the sound. Part 3. The Guardian. The library is deeper than it looks from the outside, and the farther in you walk, the more it opens up. Alcoves appear on either side, small reading nooks set into the walls with cushioned window seats, whose cushions are worn soft and flat with use, their fabrics faded to beautiful old colors, dusty rose and sage and the particular blue-gray of a winter sea. Some of these alcoves have small tables. Some have footstools. Some have just the window seat itself with its cushion and a folded blanket and a pool of candlelight. An invitation so gentle and precise that you feel it physically. But you keep walking because the breathing pulls you forward, and something in you knows, with that same quiet certainty you felt at the edge of the forest looking at the blue light, that you are meant to go all the way in. The aisle you're following widens as you proceed, the shelves stepping back on either side, and the ceiling rises too, lifting up and up until it disappears into shadow above the reach of the candlelight. And then the aisle opens out completely, and you find yourself standing at the threshold of the heart of the library. It is a great circular room. The shelves here are arranged in a curve, following the circular wall, rising up to a height that is simply staggering, shelf after shelf after shelf disappearing upward into a dimness that the candlelight does not reach. There are ladders on rails that travel along the shelves, the kind that can be pushed and slid and climbed, and the rails extend all the way up into the darkness. The floor here is slightly lower than the rest of the library, a step down, giving the room a sunken feeling, an amphitheater quality. The ceiling is vaulted and carved with something that might be a star map, the constellations traced in lines of silver gray stone that catch the candlelight and hold it. In the center of the room, coiled on a floor of dark stone, is the dragon. You do not startle. That is the first thing to notice. You see the dragon, and something in you simply says, "Oh, there you are." As if the dragon is not a shock, but a recognition. As if on some level you have always known, the way you have always known other things that are true, and deep and not easily explained, that there was something like this at the heart of the places where stories live. The dragon is enormous. Coiled as it is, you can't easily estimate its full size, but the coil fills most of the center of the room, its tail wrapped around and over, and its great head resting on its forelegs the way a cat rests its head on its paws when it sleeps on a warm afternoon. Its scales are extraordinary. In the blue light of the library, they are the color of the deep ocean, a shifting, layered blue-green that moves as the candlelight plays over them, so that what looks like solid color reveals itself, on closer observation, to be a surface of tremendous complexity. Each individual scale catches the light differently. Some are more blue, some more green, some so dark they are almost black in the hollows and creases, some so pale where the light hits them directly that they are almost silver. The effect, taken as a whole, is like looking at the surface of the sea from a height, restless with depth and shifting with light, alive with a beauty that is quiet and overwhelming at the same time. The dragon's eyes are closed. Its breathing is that deep, slow sound you followed here. Each breath, a long wave of sound and vibration, in and out, like the tide against a shore. The breath it exhales carries a faint trace of warmth that you can feel from where you stand, and also a faint smell, not fire, not the sulfur smell you might expect. It smells of old pages. Of course it does. Then the eyes open. They are gold, not bright gold, not the harsh yellow gold of new coins, but the deep, dark, layered gold of old amber, warm and clear and bottomless, lit from within with a light that is neither the blue of the books nor the gold of the candles, but something entirely the dragon's own. The irises are vast, the pupils long vertical lines of deepest black. Those eyes take you in without alarm, without aggression, with a patience and a calm that is so deep, it is almost beyond comprehension. the patience of something that has been here for longer than anything you could name, the calm of something that has seen everything and found it, on the whole, worthy of continued attention. The great head lifts, slowly, deliberately, without haste. The neck uncurls, scales sliding over scales with a sound like the pages of a very large book being turned. And the dragon raises its head to a height well above yours and looks down at you with those ancient amber eyes. The candlelight falls across the planes of its face. You can see the fine detail of the scales near its eyes, smaller and more delicate there, like the scales of a fish. You can see the faint scars from old encounters, healed long ago, the scales regrown over them like scar tissue, slightly different in color and texture. You can see, at the corners of its eyes, something that looks like the weathering of a great age. Not damage, nothing sad or wrong, just the beautiful patina of time on something that has weathered it well. The dragon does not speak out loud, or rather, it speaks in a way that is not quite speaking. The words do not come to your ears. They come to some place slightly deeper than that, some interior chamber where the things you know without being told are kept. The voice is very low, very steady, like the bass note of an organ played in a cathedral, or like a distant waterfall heard through a stone wall. Felt as much as heard. It says, "You found us." They always find us, the ones who are meant to. You try to find your voice and manage something quiet and genuine. You ask where you are, what this place is, what the dragon is doing here in this library in the forest, in the middle of this particular midnight. And the dragon tells you. Part 4. The Purpose of the Library. The dragon settles back slightly as it speaks, not with the tense, controlled relaxation of an animal managing its own impulses, but with the genuine ease of something that has not felt threatened in a very long time and is simply comfortable. Its tail adjusts, scales whispering against the stone floor. It tucks one enormous foreleg slightly and rests its chin on the other, a gesture that is unexpectedly familiar and sweet. Those amber eyes never leave your face. This library, the dragon tells you, has existed longer than the oldest book it contains, which is itself older than any civilization whose name you would recognize. It has not always been in this forest, in this clearing, under this particular arrangement of stars. It has been in many places over the many centuries of its existence. It moves, not visibly, not in any way that could be tracked or mapped or anticipated. It moves the way a dream moves, slipping from one location to another in the gaps between waking. But it is always a forest, always a midnight, always a path, always a light. The ingredients are the same. The recipe produces the same result. The library appears, and the door opens, and the right person walks in. The right person, the dragon says, is always someone who still believes in stories. Not in fiction as a category, not in entertainment as a function, but in stories as something deeper and more essential than both of those things. Someone who understands, even if they have never put it into words, that stories are how human beings have always made sense of the world, how they have always metabolized their fears and their joys and their confusions and their grief, how they have always reached across the distances between one person's private interior life and another's, how they have always tried to answer the questions that have no other answer. Who are we? What are we for? What happens when we love someone and lose them? What does it mean to be brave? What does it mean to be good? The library appears to people who are still asking those questions. People who have not decided that the answers don't matter. You ask about the books. All these books, where do they come from? The dragon is quiet for a moment before answering. Its eyes move slowly over the shelves surrounding you, and in the movement of its gaze there is something tender and proprietorial. Every story that was ever forgotten, the dragon says, finds its way here eventually. Every legend that faded when the last person who remembered it grew old and died. Every myth that stopped being told when the culture that held it changed past recognition. Every dream so vivid and strange and complete that the person who dreamed it woke with the conviction that they had been somewhere real. Those dreams are here too. Every fairy tale that was passed down through generations of whispered bedtimes, and then one night was not passed down, the thread of it snapping without ceremony. Those fairy tales are here. Every adventure that was lived but never written. Every love that was felt with the force of a legend but never found its bard. Every act of courage that happened in a moment with no witness and was taken to the grave. All of these, all the lost and forgotten and never spoken stories of all the people who ever lived, they find their way to the shelves of the Midnight Library. Not lost, never truly lost, waiting here, kept safe. That is why the dragon is here. That is what it guards. The dragon has been the guardian of the Midnight Library for longer than it can easily calculate, which means a very long time indeed. It came to this role, or was called to this role, the distinction being uncertain even to the dragon itself, in an age when the world was wilder and more magical than it is now, when dragons and libraries and the people who needed both were in less short supply. The library, the dragon explains, does not guard itself. Stories left without a guardian can be damaged, not by the forces you might expect, not fire, not flood, not the grinding of time. Stories are remarkably resilient. They survive in strange ways, in strange places, and can reconstitute themselves from surprisingly small fragments. No, the danger to the stories in this library is subtler than that. The danger is forgetting. Not the simple forgetting of a name or a date, but the deeper forgetting that happens when people stop believing that a story matters. When a story goes from being a living thing, passed from mouth to ear and heart to heart, to being a mere cultural artifact, a historical curiosity, a thing to be filed and cataloged and left alone. When a story stops being felt, it dims, and if it dims long enough, it might not go out entirely, but it comes close, and close is close enough to require a guardian. So, the dragon guards. It walks the aisles of the Midnight Library in the long hours of the night, when the library is between visitors and the candles burn their steady, patient light. It reads, when reading is called for, running its great eyes over pages of stories in languages that no longer exist, refreshing its memory of them, keeping the knowledge alive in the same way you keep a flame alive by giving it air. It listens sometimes to the stories in the books. The glowing books, the dragon tells you with something that might be fondness. The books that are still full of energy and ready to be told. They hum, a very faint sound, too low for most ears. The dragon can hear it clearly. The whole library, on a good night, sounds to the dragon like a very large, very contented choir, singing at the lowest possible volume. A lullaby for the ages. Part 5. Kingdoms above the clouds. The dragon stands now, unfolding itself with the long, unhurried grace of something that has no need to demonstrate its size, but cannot help the size being apparent anyway. It is very large, standing. You tilt your head back to take in the full height of its neck, and then it moves, not toward you, but in a direction that is clearly an invitation, toward one of the aisles of shelves, away from the circular heart of the library, and deeper into the branching wings. "Come," the dragon says, in that voice that is not quite sound. "There are things here you should see. You follow." The first section the dragon leads you to is near what seems to be the north end of the library, though north and south are concepts that lose their certainty in a place that exists between the hours, and you've been turning and walking for long enough that your internal compass has settled into a comfortable unreliability. The shelves here are somehow lighter in feeling than the rest of the library, despite the books being just as old and densely packed. There is a quality to the light here that is different. The blue glow of the books in this section has an upward quality, a lift to it, as if the light knows which direction it came from and remembers it fondly. These, the dragon says, are the stories of the sky kingdoms. You look at the nearest book. It is large, nearly the size of a world atlas, and its cover is the deep blue-gray of a pre-dawn sky, and it glows with a light that is the particular luminous pale gold of the first light before sunrise. You reach for it, and it falls open in your hands to a spread of pages dense with illustration. A city drawn in fine lines, a city of towers and bridges and arching walkways and great open plazas, all of it suspended impossibly among the clouds, anchored to them or resting on them, or growing from them the way coral grows from the floor of the sea. The towers catch the light in the illustrations. They are drawn at a high angle, as if seen from higher still. And where the light catches them, the illustrations seem to glow with their own small warmth. The people in the streets of this sky city are drawn in their going about their business poses, carrying things, talking to one another, leaning from windows, holding children's hands. Their clothing catches the wind in the way of people who have always lived in a place where the wind is a constant companion. Their hair moving, their cloaks lifted. Among the kingdoms above the clouds, the dragon tells you, pausing at your shoulder to look at the open pages, there were cities that only existed in the hour after sunrise. Not because they appeared then, they were there always, as permanent as anything with foundations of compacted cloud and bone-white stone can be permanent. But because the hour after sunrise was the only hour when the quality of the light allowed them to be seen from below by people on the ground who happened to be looking up in exactly the right direction. People would plan their whole days around that hour. They would rise before dawn to be outside and watching. When the sky turned from gray to gold, to the clear, ringing blue of a good morning, because in that transition, if you were patient and if the conditions were right, you might catch a glimpse. The undersides of the bridges, pale and distant, the glint off a window, the impossible geometry of towers against the early light. The people who lived in the sky kingdoms, the dragon continues, were not always people in the way you might expect. Some were born to it. Some arrived by means that the books do not fully explain. Routes through high mountain passes, Certain kinds of cloud formations climbed at certain kinds of speed, the right words spoken at the right altitude on a night when the stars were very close. Some had lived in the sky for so many generations that the very architecture of their bodies had adapted to altitude and wind in the same incremental way that bodies always adapt to the demands of where they live. Their lungs were large. Their eyes were sensitive to distances that would be meaningless below. Their hands were skilled at work that needed to be done quickly before a change in the wind or a shift in the cloud platform made the work site unavailable. There are dozens of books about the sky kingdoms in this section. Hundreds, perhaps, if you count the small ones. Each glows in its own particular shade of dawn gold or midday blue, or the gentle copper pink of a high-altitude sunset seen from above the clouds, where the colors are different from how they look from the ground, cleaner and more saturated, as if the atmosphere below acts as a kind of gray filter, and what the sky actually looks like, seen from the right height, is nearly too beautiful to hold. You close the open atlas gently with both hands and look for a moment at its glowing cover before you return it to the shelf. Then you follow the dragon to the next section. Part 6. Cities Beneath the Ocean. The shift as you enter this part of the library is immediate and complete. The quality of the light changes. The blue of the glowing books here is deeper, not the open sky blue of the previous section, not the first light gold, but a blue that is darker and more saturated. The blue of depth, of water pressing down and filtering the light from above until only the blue and the green of it remain. The temperature drops by a degree or two. The air here has a faint mineral quality to it, something clean and old and vast, like the smell of rain before it arrives. The books in this section are, many of them, wrapped in what appears to be a light layer of something crystalline. Not ice, not quite, but something that makes the light bend when it passes through, creating small rainbows in the folds and at the corners of the pages. Some of them are written on materials that are not paper. The pages of one book you carefully open are made of something thin and slightly translucent, somewhere between vellum and the dried. Membrane of something biological, and the writing on them is impressed rather than drawn. The letters pushed into the surface by a stylus with steady, deliberate force, each letter as precise as a seal pressed in wax. These are the cities beneath the ocean, the dragon says, and you can hear in the not-quite voice the deep fondness of something that is very attached to this section of its library. Of all the lost places in the Midnight Library, the ocean cities are perhaps the most consistently dreamed about by the people of the world above the surface. The dragon believes this is because the ocean represents, for creatures who cannot easily enter it, the purest version of somewhere else. The sky is above you, and you look at it every day. The forests are beside you. The mountains are visible at the horizon, but the ocean goes down, and what it contains is genuinely unknown to most of those who live alongside it. The ocean floor is more distant from the daily experience of most people than the moon, and into that genuine mystery, the human imagination has always poured its surplus of stories. The ocean cities in these books were not lost to disaster, the dragon tells you, or not all of them. Some sank, yes. Some were built on geology that did not hold, or were raised by technologies that proved ultimately unsuitable for indefinite maintenance in a marine environment. Some were swallowed by the kind of slow, creeping, sea level change that is a fact of the world's history. The ocean, claiming a little more of the shoreline every generation in a process too gradual for a single human life to fully register, but perfectly apparent in the span of dragon time. But some of the ocean cities sank quite deliberately. Some of the peoples who built on and by the sea looked at the surface world and its complications and decided, in the way that peoples sometimes decide things, that down was a more interesting direction than out or up. The sinking of those cities was a feat of engineering and magic that this library has at least 3 entire shelves dedicated to. And the dragon pauses at those shelves and runs one claw tip gently along the spines of the books there with the attention of someone revisiting a favorite chapter. One book catches your eye, not because of its glow, which is minimal, a faint, cool light like bioluminescence seen from the surface, but because of its cover, which seems to be made of something like mother of pearl, iridescent and shifting in the candlelight, showing now pink, now green, now deep blue as you move. The dragon notices your attention and nudges the book slightly forward on the shelf with one claw. You open it. The first pages are an illustration, a city seen from the outside, from the water, the light filtering down from the surface in long, silvery green shafts that catch the spires and cupolas of the city and make them glow. The buildings are covered in the sea life that has accumulated over centuries of habitation in the deep water, coral, anemone, the delicate lacework of bryozoa, curtains of kelp swaying in deep water currents. The streets of the city are traversed by people in vehicles that look like very elongated lanterns, sealed glass vessels propelled by some means the illustration does not quite make clear. Children play in what appear to be air-filled parks, clear domes filled with the pale ghost of filtered surface light, grass. Inside them and small trees, the children running with a slight awkward buoyancy that is the result of slightly more air pressure than they are fully used to. A whole world living in the dark and the deep and the profound quiet of the ocean floor. The city's lights visible from miles away to any deep-sea creature that happened to pass. A warm and beckoning glow in the permanent night of the deep water. A civilization in the dark that learned to be its own light. Part 7. Forests where spirits tell stories. The next section the dragon leads you to is older than the others. You can feel the age of it before you see it, a particular quality of stillness in the air, a gravity that has nothing to do with weight but with the accumulated significance of things that have been tended for a very long time. The shelves here are darker, more worn, the wood of them almost black with age, the iron fittings on the shelves' edges furred with that beautiful blue-green patina that iron develops over centuries of exposure to moist air. The books here are less uniform than in the other sections. They come in all shapes and all kinds of bindings, and range in apparent age from things that look old enough to be genuine relics to things that look merely old, merely centuries rather than millennia. Their glow where it exists is warmer than the sky gold or the ocean blue of the previous sections. It is the warm amber green of light filtered through a canopy of trees in summer, the glow of light that has passed through something living on its way to where it is now. These, the dragon says, are the forest stories, the stories told by spirits, or told about spirits, or both. In many cases, the distinction between those two categories is not the clear line you might expect. The tradition of forest spirits who tell stories, the dragon explains, is one of the oldest and most widespread in the library's collection. It appears in forms so varied and so geographically separated that the simplest explanation for its ubiquity is that it is true, or was true, or is true in the way that things are true when they exist at a level of reality that is not always accessible from the everyday world, but is consistently accessible to people in states of deep attention, to people sitting alone in forests at night, to people in the long hours of illness when the boundary between the interior world and the exterior one becomes temporarily permeable, to children who have not yet fully learned to discount the evidence of their imaginations. In the traditions collected in this section of the library, forest spirits tell stories for different reasons, depending on the culture and the context. In some traditions, the spirit stories are warnings, tales told to steer a traveler away from a dangerous path, encoded in narrative rather than stated plainly, because the story you feel in your chest travels further and stays longer than a fact you hear with your ears. In others, they are gifts, a spirit who has witnessed something extraordinary over the course of its long, rooted, deeply embedded life in a particular place, who chooses a particular listener to receive the gift of that witnessing. In still others, the stories are prayers, the forest itself talking, the trees and the fungi and the moss and the deep network of roots all participating in a communication so slow and so vast that a human being can only catch a fragment of it. But the fragment, distilled into something like story, is enough. There is a book here that glows more brightly than the others in this section. A warm amber green light, stronger and steadier. The dragon gestures toward it. You take it from the shelf. It is a comfortable weight, not too heavy. The cover soft under your fingers, something between leather and bark, something that came from a tree, though in what form and by what process is not immediately obvious. It falls open to a section of text in a language you can't read, but alongside the text is an illustration that you can read perfectly well. It shows a forest at night, lit from within by the soft phosphorescent glow of the trees themselves, and in the clearing at the center of the illustration, a figure, small, human-sized, hard to make out in detail, is sitting with its back against the largest of the trees, and the tree's roots, visible above ground, have arranged themselves around the figure in a curve that is unmistakably the posture of an embrace. The figure's face, turned upward toward the canopy, is perfectly calm. The tree's branches above are moving in a way that is different from the branches of the surrounding trees, more deliberately, more rhythmically, in a pattern that, if you studied it long enough, might resolve itself into words. You hold the book for a long, still moment, then set it gently back. Part 8. Ancient Dragons Who Once Ruled the Skies. The guardian moves through the aisles with a natural ease, the great scaled body navigating the library's architecture with a fluency that suggests not just familiarity, but a kind of affection. This is clearly a creature that knows every shelf and every step of this place that has walked these aisles so many times that the movements required are as natural and unconscious as breathing. The next section, the dragon says nothing to introduce. It simply slows as it enters, and the quality of the silence changes. The books here glow with a light that is different from any other section you visited. The light is primarily a deep, smoldering red gold, not quite the gold of the sky books, not quite the warm amber of the forest books, but a color that sits between those two and deeper than both. The color of fire seen through a distant screen, the color of the setting sun hitting the underside of a high cloud. And the light here does not pulse exactly, but breathes. Each book's glow moving in and out in a rhythm that is slow and irregular in a way that feels biological. The rhythm of something sleeping. You do not need the dragon to tell you what this section contains. You know. The dragon knows you know. For a moment, the two of you simply stand together at the threshold of the section, you and the guardian, and look at the glowing shelves. These are the records of the dragons, the guardian says, eventually. Its voice carries something different here. Not pride exactly, not nostalgia exactly, but something that sits between those two and has its own quality. Recognition, perhaps. The feeling of seeing one's own history laid out. The books in this section cover an expanse of time that is difficult to hold in the mind all at once. The oldest books here describe a world before the world you know, a planet so different in its geography and its ecology that it would be barely recognizable. The continents in different positions, the ocean in different proportions, the atmosphere slightly different in composition. And in that world, the ancestors of the library's guardian, the first dragons, the ones who predate the age of myth, flew over landscapes that no human eye has ever seen. They are described in these books in detail so precise and so lovingly careful that you wonder who was there to record them, or whether the books recorded themselves, or whether the dragon memories are so long and so reliable that the guardian itself might have contributed to the writing of these volumes at some point in its own past. The guardian walks slowly along the shelves of this section, the tip of one great wing trailing very lightly against the book spines as it moves, not touching the books, just passing near them, a gesture of proximity, of connection. You walk beside it, or as near beside it as the proportions allow, your shoulder level with the junction of its wing and its body. The books here tell of a time when dragons were so numerous that their flight patterns affected the weather, the beating of thousands of great wings in consistent migration routes, influencing the wind, the way a river influences the land it runs through. Of a time when the sky was full of them at dawn, before the sun fully cleared the horizon, their scales catching the first light and throwing it back changed and improved, the sky seeming to ring like a struck bell with the combination of the light and the sound and the movement of so many immense wings. They tell of the gradual diminishing of that age, not dramatically, not in a single catastrophe, though there were catastrophes, but the long, slow attrition of the centuries, the steady reduction in range and number, the adjustment of dragon behavior to a world that was slowly becoming less hospitable to the things that made dragon life possible. The books here are not despairing. The guardian's voice, when it touches this part of its library's history, is not despairing. These are the records, They are held here so they will not be lost. The great age of dragons is not forgotten while these books exist, and while something capable of reading them lives to guard them. The guardian pauses at one book that glows with a particular brightness, the deepest, most saturated red gold of any book in this section, almost too bright to look at directly, like looking at a coal in a fire's heart. It does not take the book from the shelf. It only looks at it, and you stand beside it and look at it too. What is that one? You ask. The first story, the dragon says, the oldest book in the library. Neither of you moves or speaks for a long moment. The book glows. Then the guardian turns and leads you back toward the heart of the library. And it is time for the last and most important part of your visit. Time. Part 9. The book meant for you. In the circular heart of the library, beneath the vaulted ceiling with its carved star map, the dragon settles back into its resting posture with that same slow, unhurried grace. You stand at a comfortable distance and watch it move, and the movement of its scales in the candlelight and the blue glow of the books is something you know you will remember always. That particular quality of light on a surface that is both armor and skin, protective and alive at the same time. The dragon reaches, with one carefully controlled motion, to a shelf to its right. Not the topmost shelf, not the bottom, but somewhere in the middle, within easy reach, as if this book has been positioned where it is specifically for the purpose of being accessible at this moment. It takes the book from the shelf with a precision that is striking for a creature of that size, one claw tip catching under the spine and drawing the book out from between its neighbors without disturbing them. It holds the book out toward you. You step forward and take it. It is a comfortable size, not a tiny book, not an enormous one. Somewhere in the range of a book you could hold in both hands with ease, which is what you do. The cover is the color of deep night, not black exactly, but the very dark blue of the sky at its darkest, between the stars. That color that you see when you look at the space between constellations and your eyes fully adjust to the dark. The cover is soft, a material somewhere between suede and old velvet, and it glows. The glow of this particular book is not blue and not gold and not the red gold of the dragon section. It is all of those and somehow also none of those. A light that shifts as you turn the book in your hands, cycling through its colors the way firelight cycles through the colors of its burning. It is warm under your fingers, not warmly warm, warmly warm, the specific warmth of something alive. Why this one, you ask? Of all the books in the library, why is this the one for you? The guardian settles its great head on its foreleg. Its amber eyes are thoughtful. Every story in this library was once someone's to tell, it says, and many of them have been waiting a very long time for someone to take them back out into the world. Stories want to be told. That is the nature of a story. It is not a static thing. It is not a collection of words pressed between covers. It is a living process that requires a teller and a listener to fully exist. When a story is told, it becomes more than it was alone. It completes itself. The library holds the stories between their tellings, but holding is not the same as living. For a story to truly live, it must be released. This book, the dragon says, has been waiting for you. Not for the person you would be in some future iteration of yourself, not for someone you aspire to become. For you, the person who walked a forest path tonight and followed a light and believed in what they found. That is the only credential required. You hold the book tighter for a moment. Then you open it. The pages feel like something between paper and light. They have the weight and the texture of paper. You can feel the individual pages between your thumb and forefinger when you turn them. But they are luminous in a way that no paper has a right to be, each page giving off its own gentle glow from the inside of the paper itself. The words on each page visible without needing to hold the page toward any candle. The words are in your language, of course they are. You begin to read, and the story begins. Part 10. The story from the book. The story in the book is called The River That Remembered. It is a very old story, old before it was written down, old before the culture that first told it had a word for the thing they were describing, old in the way that the best stories are old, which is to say that it belongs to a time before the story's particular content was fully formed, a time when the story was more feeling than narrative. The story grew over centuries of telling into the shape you're now reading. But underneath that shape, underneath the words, you can still feel the original feeling, the one that prompted someone a very long time ago to sit down beside a fire in a world much older and simpler than yours and say, "Let me tell you something. There was once a river." This is not unusual in and of itself. There have been many rivers, in many worlds and many ages, and the histories of most of them would fill more shelves than this library contains. But this particular river was unusual for one reason. It remembered. Not in the way that rivers remember by carving their histories into stone. The course changes, the erosion patterns, the fossils pressed into the riverbed like pressed flowers. The river remembered in a more active and deliberate way than that. It remembered the things that happened at its banks and on its surface and in its water. It remembered the stories that were told near it by the people who came to live by it as settlements grew up along its banks over the generations. It held those stories in the movement of its water, not the words exactly, but the feeling of the words, the emotional frequency of each story, stored in the way a tuning fork stores the vibration of a struck note, holding it and releasing it in diminishing waves for long after the original blow. On very still nights, when the river ran low and slow, and the surface was calm and reflective, people who lived beside it would come down to sit at its edge and listen. And from the water, from the slow, dark, glass-still surface of the river at midnight, they would hear something. Not a voice, nothing as clear as a voice, something more like the feeling of a voice, or rather, the feeling of being told something important by someone who loves you very much and is choosing their words with care. People would come down to the river in the quiet of the night and come back different. Not dramatically different, not in the way of visions or revelations. They would come back settled. They would come back as if they had been reminded of something they had always known but had recently lost hold of. As if the river, with its vast and patient memory, had offered them a portion of the accumulated wisdom of all the stories ever told at its banks, and they had absorbed some of it through the simple act of stillness and listening. Over the generations, the people who lived beside the river developed a practice. They called it going down to listen. It was not a formal ritual. There was no ceremony, no prescribed time or posture or prayer. You simply went when you felt the need, in the quiet of the night, and you sat at the river's edge and you were still, and you listened to the water that remembered. Children were brought for the first time as very small children, held in a parent's arms at the river's edge. And even if they were too young to understand the full weight of what the river carried, they were brought because it was believed that you could begin listening before you understood, and that the river's memory would find a place in you before you could articulate what it meant. When the people left the banks of the river, when drought or war, or the simply restless human impulse toward somewhere else drew them away from the settlement beside the water, they took the memory of the listening with them. They told their children. They told their children's children. And the telling preserved something of the river's frequency, the way a song preserves something of the voice that first sang it, even when the original singer is gone for centuries. The story of the river that remembered was told in places where no river ran, in deserts and mountains and open seas, by people so far removed from the original banks that the river itself had long since changed its course, and the settlement beside it was dust. The story survived because the feeling at its heart was true. The feeling that the world holds our stories even after we have let go of them. The feeling that nothing truly felt and truly told is ever entirely lost. The feeling that if you are very still, in the right place, at the right hour, you can hear the echo of every story that was ever worth telling. The feeling, in other words, of sitting in the midnight library at the deep of the night, with the candles burning steady, and the books glowing on all sides, and an ancient dragon, warm and watchful nearby. The story ends where it began, at the river. The water is still, the night is quiet. Someone is sitting at the bank, listening. You close the book. Part 11, The Coming of Dawn. You become aware, gradually, that the quality of the light in the library has changed. It is subtle at first, so subtle that you might dismiss it as a trick of attention. The way you sometimes notice something different about a room without being able to immediately say what has changed. But it is real. The candlelight is the same. The candles still burn in their steady, uncanny stillness. No flicker, no diminishment. The books still glow. The dragon still rests in the center of the circular room, its eyes open now, those amber depths watching you with a warm and unhurried calm. But there is something in the air of the library that is beginning, very slowly, to shift. Something slightly cooler, something that is not exactly gray, but carries the suggestion of gray, the way a room carries the suggestion of a smell long after the source of the smell has been removed. The particular quality of the deep midnight, that enclosed, timeless, velvet quality, is beginning, very slightly, to thin. Dawn is coming. The dragon says this without speaking it. You simply know, the way you know things in the library, in a way that bypasses the ordinary channels. And you also know, without needing to be told, what this means. The midnight library does not exist in the daylight. It is not that the daylight would harm it. It is more fundamental than that. The library is a midnight thing, constituted of and by the particular physics of the deep night, the hour when the boundary between the possible and the impossible is most permeable, the hour when stories can manifest in stone and candlelight and the scales of an ancient guardian. As dawn approaches and the night begins its slow recession, the library follows it, retreating with the darkness toward the place where it waits between its appearances. You should go, the dragon says, and there is no sadness in it, no urgency, just a statement of the shape of things. You should go, and you should carry what you came here carrying, and you should know that the library will be here again. Not for you, necessarily, though perhaps for you, for whoever is meant to find it next. The library does not disappear, it simply waits, and the door will open again on another midnight for another traveler who still believes in stories. You hold the book the dragon gave you, which has not dimmed despite the coming dawn. It glows still, its night sky blue shifting through its cycle of colors in your hands, warm and alive and full of something that is not quite weight but is not quite weightlessness either. You take one last look at the library, at the shelves with their thousands of books and their quiet glow, at the high ceiling with its carved star map, at the candles burning in their hundreds, each one a small, steady light, at the reading nooks with their worn cushions and their folded blankets, at the great circular heart of the library with its curved walls of books rising into the darkness above, and at the dragon in the center of it all, watching you with those deep, amber eyes that have watched so many things over so many centuries. Thank you, you say, for letting me in, for showing me. The dragon inclines its great head. The movement is slow and graceful, and somehow both regal and personal at the same time. Stories are not mine to give, it says. They belong to everyone who has ever told one, and everyone who has ever needed one, and everyone who will ever need one in all the years to come. I only keep them safe. But you are welcome here, traveler. You were always welcome here. You turn and walk back through the aisle, through the warmth and the smell of old paper and candle wax, past the glowing books and the sleeping alcoves, and the small tables with their accumulated domestic evidence of a space that is loved, toward the front of the library. The tall doors are still open. The blue light still spills out into the clearing. The ivy still frames the door. The carved dragon above the entrance still catches the light in its gem-dark eye. You step through the door. Part 12. The Forest Path Home. The air of the clearing is cooler than the library's warmth. Not cold. The night is still gentle, still holding some of the warmth it absorbed from the day, the way soil holds warmth after the sun moves on. But the contrast with the library is noticeable, and you breathe the outside air deeply and feel it fresh and clean in your lungs. The clearing around the library is very still. The trees stand at their ring-circle perimeter, their branches meeting overhead in that arch that looks like a bow of respect. The moon, which was nearly overhead when you arrived, has moved now, descending toward the western tree line, its light still bright but at a different angle, casting the shadows of the trees longer and more lateral than before. The grass of the clearing is silver in the moonlight, each blade separate and precise and luminous. You look back at the library. It stands as you found it, ancient, ivy-covered, the tall windows glowing with their warm, blue light, the great doors still open. But even as you watch, something is beginning. something you can see only in the way you can see the stars fade when dawn is coming. Not the moment they go out, but the gradual dimming, the slowly increasing competition between starlight and coming daylight that the starlight, this one morning, as every morning, will eventually lose. The edges of the library, the corners and the eaves and the detail of the carvings are beginning to soften, not disappear, not yet, but lose the crisp distinctness of the deep night, begin to take on the slightly hazy quality of things that are transitional, things that are between states. You understand that you should go now, not because you are being asked to leave, but because there is a natural end to every visit, and you have reached it. And part of respecting this place is recognizing that moment and honoring it. You walk back toward the tree line. The forest receives you gently, the same cooperative ease with which it let you through before. The moss gives under your feet. The branches part. Behind you, you hear nothing. No sound of the library, no creak of doors or rustle of dragon wings. Only silence and the very faint warm smell of old books that lingers in the air for a little longer, carrying with it the particular quality of the library, its warmth and its welcome, before the night air absorbs it and it is gone. The path is where you left it. The lantern is still in your hand, still burning, though the flame looks very small and ordinary after the candlelight of the library. A modest and domestic thing among the silver and shadow of the forest at the deep end of night. You set your feet on the path and begin to walk. The path carries you through the forest at its own pace, unhurried, winding between the dark columns of the old trees. The owl calls again, somewhere to your right. That same, single, long, low note, unhurried. The moss is cool under the fallen leaves at the path's edge. The stars above you in their patches of sky between the branches are still bright. But at the horizon, if you look where the trees are shortest and the sky is most visible, there is a change happening. Not yet light, nothing as clear as light, but a very faint differentiation between the absolute black of the deepest night and the slightly warmer, slightly less defined darkness that precedes the dawn. You walk. The book in your hand glows on, steady and patient, its light a small traveling library, carrying its story with you out of the forest and back toward the waking world. And as you walk, you think about what you've seen and heard and felt in the last hours. Not in an analyzing way, not picking it apart or trying to understand it in the way that things need to be understood before they can be filed under a category and set aside, just carrying it. The way. You carry anything that matters, not tightly, not held at arm's length, but close to the body, held carefully, with attention. You think about the dragon, and how its calmness was not the calmness of something simple or limited, but the deep, settled calm of something that had found its purpose and inhabits it fully. And how rare and beautiful that is. You think about the sky cities and the ocean cities and the forest spirits and all the millions of stories on those millions of shelves, all of them alive in their quiet, luminescent way, none of them truly gone. You think about the river that remembered and its patient accumulation of the emotional residue of everything told at its banks, and about what it means to tell a story well, not perfectly, not with the right words or the right timing or the right delivery, but honestly, with honesty, with the genuine intention to give something. The trees begin to thin. You can hear, somewhere far off, the first sound of morning. Not a bird, not yet, but the almost subliminal shift in the texture of the silence that happens in the last minutes before the first bird calls. A kind of anticipation in the air, the world preparing. And then you are at the edge of the forest, and the path comes out of the trees and into the open, and ahead of you the sky is doing what it always does at this hour, and is always extraordinary for doing. It is turning. The black overhead is the same, but at the horizon, toward the east, the darkness has loosened, the way a clenched hand loosens, and through that loosening, a color is beginning to appear. Not quite blue, not quite gray, not quite anything with a name yet. A color that exists for only a few minutes each morning in that first whisper of approaching light, and which, if you happen to be outside and awake at that exact moment, hits something in you that is well below the level of aesthetic appreciation. It hits something animal and ancient, and profoundly glad to be alive and watching. You stop walking, and you stand at the edge of the forest, and you watch the sky. Part 13. What remains? The dragon, you know without turning back to check, has returned to its watch. It does not rest, not fully, not in the way of animals that sleep. It rests in the way of guardians, which is to say, with one part of itself always attentive, always listening for the sounds of the book's hum changing, always aware of the position of every volume on every shelf. In the hours between visitors, it walks the aisles. It checks on books that it knows are particularly lonely, the ones whose stories are so far from anything familiar that even the rare visitor who wanders this far might not stop long enough to really look. It sits with these books for a while. It reads. It keeps the connection alive. It does not know when the library will appear again, or to whom. The library does not consult it in these decisions any more than a river consults its banks about where to flow. But it trusts the process. It has been trusting the process for a very long time, and it has not been disappointed. The right people always come. Not always the people you might expect, not always the scholars or the dreamers, or the people who have dedicated their lives to the preservation of old stories. Sometimes those people, yes, but also the person who has never read a myth in their life, but who once, as a child, heard a grandmother's voice telling a story in a kitchen on a winter afternoon, and has carried the feeling of that voice ever since, not knowing exactly what they are carrying. The person who cried at a piece of music once and did not know why. The person who pauses every time they pass a very old building and looks at it for a moment longer than they need to, feeling the weight of all the things that happened inside it in all the years before they arrived. The person who walked a forest path tonight and followed a light. The dragon will be there when the library appears again, and again after that, and again. For as long as stories exist, there will be forgotten stories that need keeping. And for as long as forgotten stories need keeping, there will be the Midnight Library. And for as long as the Midnight Library exists, there will be the guardian in its heart, patient and watchful, and deeply, unchangingly fond of its work. The closing reflection. Stories do not disappear. This is the thing to hold on to, the thing to carry back out into the waking world with you, tucked in beside the glow of the book from the library that is still, even now, warm in your hands. Stories do not disappear when the last person who knew them by heart takes that knowledge to the grave. They do not disappear when the culture that gave rise to them changes beyond recognition. They do not disappear when the language they were told in falls out of use. They do not disappear when the fire burns the manuscript, when the flood takes the archive, when the institution that was supposed to preserve them runs out of money and closes its doors. Stories are more tenacious than all of that. They are more resilient and more surprising and more wickedly determined to survive than any of the systems built to hold them give them credit for. They survive in fragments, and fragments are enough. A single image, a single character, a single turn of phrase passed from grandmother to grandchild in a kitchen on a winter afternoon, and that single fragment carries within it the seed of the whole story. And the seed can germinate, and the story can grow again from almost nothing, if the conditions are right. They survive in feelings, in the particular quality of a feeling that you recognize when you read something or hear something or see something. The feeling of, oh yes, that thing I have been carrying without a name. The feeling of recognition, the feeling of not being alone in your experience of the world. That feeling is the story, the bare bones of it, the living heart of it, and it cannot be destroyed because it is not made of anything that can be burned or flooded or forgotten. It is made of the fact of human experience, which continues for as long as there are humans experiencing it. And they survive in places like the midnight library, in the deep of the forest, under the midnight sky, where a stone building covered in ivy glows with blue light from within, and an ancient dragon walks the aisles in the small hours of the night, and the books hum very softly, all of them, like a lullaby so old it existed before the word lullaby did. The library will be there tomorrow night somewhere, perhaps in this forest, perhaps in another one, perhaps in the space between the pages of a book you have not yet opened, perhaps in the quality of light in a room where someone is telling a story to someone else who is listening with their whole self. The library is anywhere that a story is held carefully, with love, and offered to whoever needs it. You carry your book. The dawn grows, the first bird calls, a single clear note, then silence, then two notes, then the tentative beginning of a song that will be in full voice by the time you reach home. The world is waking up, and somewhere in the forest behind you, the midnight library is slowly, peacefully going to sleep. The candles dim but do not go out. The books settle on their shelves. The dragon lowers its great head onto its foreleg, and its eyes close slowly, and the vast breathing deepens, and the library rests, and the books dream their luminous dreams, and they wait. They wait for the next midnight, for the next path, for the next light through the trees, for the next traveler who still believes in stories. Good night, dear adventurers. You are that traveler. You have always been that traveler. Wherever you are tonight, wrapped in your blanket, nestled in your chair, listening in the dark with your eyes already closed, know that the stories are there with you, the ones you know and love and have carried for years, the ones you haven't found yet, the ones being told right now, at this very moment, in rooms and forests and libraries all around the world, all of them alive, all of them waiting, Let your breathing slow. Let the book in your imaginary hands grow warm and heavy, and then weightless. Let the forest path dissolve beneath your feet. Let the blue light fade to the warm, familiar dark behind your eyelids. Sleep now. Dream the stories that are meant for you. The library will be there when you need it. And if you enjoyed this journey tonight, if you found something warm and quiet and worth keeping in this corner of the midnight world, please consider leaving a like and subscribing to Midnight Tales. Every subscriber, every person who chooses to keep returning to this space helps this library stay open, helps the stories keep going, and there are so many more stories waiting to be told. I will see you in the next one, dear adventurers. Until then, sleep well, dream gently, and remember, the dragon is keeping watch. End of script. The Dragon Who Guards the Midnight Library. A Midnight Tales original word count. Approximately 15,000 plus words. Expanded interlude on the nature of forgotten stories. There is a particular kind of loss that does not announce itself. When someone dies and takes a story with them, there is no moment of ceremony for the story itself. There is grief for the person, as there should be, as there must be. But the story simply stops. Mid-sentence sometimes, mid-paragraph. Sometimes right at the most interesting part, right at the moment where the listener would have leaned forward and said, "And then what?" And the answer would have been extraordinary. And the answer is gone. The listener remains, leaning forward in a room where the voice has stopped, and the silence is so complete and so ordinary feeling that it is hard to believe anything remarkable has been lost. This is the loss that the Midnight Library was made to address, not the dramatic, flagged losses, the burning of the Library of Alexandria, the destruction of manuscripts in wars and conquests, the deliberate erasure of written records. Those losses are terrible, and their consequences are real and lasting. But they are at least witnessed, losses, mourned losses, losses that generated response and recovery efforts and long scholarly arguments about what specifically was gone and what might be reconstructed and what is truly, irrevocably absent. They are named absences. The losses that fill the Midnight Library are the unnamed ones. The story that lived only in one person's memory and was never written down. The legend that was passed down for 40 generations in oral tradition, and then, in the 41st generation, the elder died in winter before the spring could bring the gathering at which it was always told. The dream that a child in a village, no longer on any map, had on a night in a century whose name no living scholar knows. A dream so vivid and so coherent and so full of the specific gravity of myth that it was, in the truest sense, a story dreamed rather than told, a story that existed in one small sleeping mind for one night and then vanished with the morning and was never externalized in any form. These are the stories the dragon guards. These are the ones that glow on the shelves of the Midnight Library, patient and warm and ready. These are the ones that the library is for. When you walk the aisles of the Midnight Library, what you are walking through is not the absence of the forgotten. What you are walking through is the proof that forgetting does not mean gone. There is a difference between a thing that has been set down and a thing that has ceased to exist. The library is that difference, made physical, made permanent, made into shelves of dark wood and books that breathe, and a dragon at the center of it all, keeping the lights on. The dragon, in its long tenure as guardian, has developed what might be called a philosophy about this, though the dragon would not use that word, would find it too formal for something that is simply the way it has come to understand the work. The philosophy is this: a story is not the telling of it. A story is not the words. A story is not even the meaning that the words point toward, the lesson or the warning or the beauty or the grief. A story is the connection between the teller and the listener. It is the act of one person reaching toward another person with something they have made or found or received or imagined, and saying, here is this thing, this is for you, and the other person reaching back and receiving it. The telling is how that connection happens. The words are how the connection is carried. But the connection itself, that bridge, that reaching, that fundamental willingness to be in the same imaginative space as someone else, that is what a story is. And that is what cannot be lost. Because as long as there are people, there is the impulse to reach. There is the impulse to say, here, I have something, take it. There is the impulse to sit down beside someone else in a warm place when the night is long and the dark is close, and begin with the oldest sentence in any language. Let me tell you a story. That impulse does not go quiet. It does not run out. It has been running without interruption for as long as a species has been capable of it, which is to say, for as long as a species has existed in any form worth calling by that name. It is more fundamental than language. It is the impulse that gave rise to language, or at least to the particular kind of language that is narrative, that is structured time, that is this happened, and then this happened, and then, and then, and then. The brain that can follow a story is the brain that can plan, can imagine a future, can hold in mind a sequence of events that is not yet complete, and work toward the completion of it. The story-following brain is the forward-looking brain, which is why the dragon has always suspected the stories that live in the midnight library have that feeling of pointing forward, not into the past, though they came from the past, but forward, into whoever reads them next, into whoever carries them next, into the endless ongoing now of human imagination. Expanded interlude, the dragon's own story. The dragon has a story of its own, of course. Everything that exists long enough develops a story. Its earliest memory is of a sky that was different from the sky now, a sky with more in it, a sky that was genuinely shared, not just between weather and birds, but between the large, warm-blooded, wing-beating creatures that the dragon's ancestors were, and the various other inhabitants of the high air. There were things in the sky, in those earliest years, that have no names in any current language. The names existed once. They are in the library, in those red gold glowing books in the dragon's section. But the names are in languages that only the dragon can now read. The dragon's early life was not spent in any library. Libraries came later, much later, came with the kind of civilization that builds permanent structures and develops the technology of writing and begins to feel the anxiety about forgetting that motivates all preservation efforts. Before libraries, before writing, before permanent structures, the dragon spent its first centuries doing what dragons in that age did, which was flying enormous distances, the whole circumference of the world many times over, in the slow centuries of the pre-civilizational world. The dragon saw the continents when they were different shapes. It watched the ice advance and retreat at the poles over the 10,000-year cycles of the deep climate. It witnessed, from altitude, the slow incremental spread of human settlements along coastlines and river valleys, the tiny lights of cooking fires beginning to populate the darkness as the millennia turned. It was the stories that drew it down, eventually, not the fires. It had seen fires since long before humans made them. But the stories. In that pre-library age, the stories were told at the fires, and from altitude on a still night, a dragon with particularly acute hearing could catch fragments, snatches of narrative riding the rising warm air from the fire up into the dark. The dragon, circling far above, would catch these fragments, a name, a verb, the emotional inflection of a climax, the particular cadence of an ending, and find itself wanting more, wanting the whole story, wanting the context for the fragment, wanting to know what happened before and after, and why and to whom, and with what consequences. This is, as the dragon has reflected in the long centuries since, a rather excellent definition of what it means to be caught by a story. To receive a fragment and want the rest. To find yourself invested in a set of events and people that do not directly affect your survival, or your safety, or your material circumstances in any way, and yet to care about them with the urgency of real caring. To follow a thread of narrative as if the answer at the end of it is genuinely important. This is what stories do to people. It is apparently also what they do to certain kinds of very large, very old, impressionable dragons. It descended in the end to a village at the bend of a river on a warm night in a summer whose year no calendar now marks. It circled lower than it had ever come before, and the stories it caught were more complete, more coherent, more beautiful for being coherent. A woman was telling a story to a group of children gathered around a fire. The story was about a river. This river, the river at the bend of which the village had been built, and the woman said, the river remembered. And the dragon, hanging in the air above, felt something shift in the way things shift when you hear something that is simply true. It did not land that night. It was not ready, and neither were they. But it came back, night after night, lower each time, and the stories rose to meet it. And somewhere in those visits, a compact was formed. Not in words, but in the way that the most important compacts always are. In the space between beings who have found each other and recognized in each other something essential and irreplaceable. The village gave the dragon stories. The dragon gave the village its protection, and the stories were safe. The library came much later still. The library was not the dragon's invention. It emerged from the accumulated energy of all the stories that had been brought to the dragon for safekeeping over the long centuries, taking physical form the way that enough water in a given place will eventually form a river, finding its natural shape and settling into it. The dragon found itself inside it one midnight and recognized it with the same feeling of, oh, there you are that the library's best visitors always feel when they first step through the door. The dragon was home, and it has been home ever since. Final night reflection. Outside, the dawn continues its slow approach. The first bird has long since started its song. Others have joined. The sky at the horizon is properly light now, the gray resolving into the first pale gold of the actual sunrise, still some minutes away. The stars overhead are holding on, the brightest ones still visible, the fainter ones already washed out by the growing light. In the forest, the midnight library is nearly gone. You do not go back to check. You carry the book and you carry the story, and you carry the feeling of the library, its warmth and its wonder, and the deep-seated calm of knowing that the stories are there and are safe, that the dragon is there and is watching, that the door will open again. You are nearly home. The familiar world is reassembling itself around you. The shapes you know, the sounds you know, the smell of the morning air that is not the forest, but is not entirely unlike it either. Your body knows you are close. Your feet know the path. You are tired, but it is the best kind of tired. The kind that comes from having been genuinely somewhere, genuinely present, genuinely open to what the night offered. The kind that tips you not into uneasy, fractured sleep, but into the deep, complete, untroubled sleep of someone who has done the thing they were supposed to do today and is ready to rest. So rest. You have done the thing. You followed the light. You opened the door. You walked the aisles and held the books and listened to the dragon and carried the story home. That is everything. That is all of it. That is enough. Let the book rest on a table beside you, still glowing softly in the last of the night. Let it keep its light while you rest yours. The stories will be there when you wake. They always are. Good night. Sweet dreams. Sleep well and deep. The dragon is keeping watch.